Well, I mentioned at the top of the show that the nuclear debate is, of course, one we're going to be having right up until the next election. And as much as Labor bashes the coalition plan, it's clear that voters aren't buying it because you've got 60% of Australians support nuclear as part of the country's energy mix, according to a poll by the Lowy Institute out today. Let's see what my panel thinks of this. Joining me now is former Labor Senator Stephen Conroy and One Nation Chief of Staff James Ashby. Gentlemen, welcome. Stephen, 6 in 10 Aussies support nuclear energy, according to this poll. Why is Labor continuing with the scare campaign?
Well, look, I think there's been 3 or 4 polls which have all shown some degree of support for the proposition, not necessarily the coalition's proposition, just the proposition of nuclear power being included. But I mean, the most definitive poll so far has shown that people overwhelmingly support renewables in terms of wind and solar. So I think we need to keep that in perspective, and that nuclear rates much lower down that ranking than the broad number that you just tried to suggest. Having said that, Labor needs to be very careful. It can't just assume that everybody takes the view that might have been prevalent 20 years ago, which was nuclear disasters around the world were well remembered, and there's great risks with living near them, and all those sorts of arguments. I think Labor has to prosecute the case against the Dutton plan. And the problem is there's not much to oppose at the moment because there's no costing, there's no technology being picked, there's no confirmed sites, and there's no percentage of power that is going to be included in the grid. I mean, the calculations so far have been the 7 sites might produce as little as 4%. Well, what's the other 96% if only 4% is coming from the nuclear option? So people are prepared to give it a look because people are feeling desperate. They want to see the cost of living, particularly energy prices, coming down. The problem is that Peter Dutton's plan doesn't deliver any energy price decreases till 2040 when the first nuclear power comes online. So there's plenty of substance to attack them on because of the lack of substance that you're seeing from Peter Dutton and the Liberals so far.
Well, as for the other 96%, I mean, we've got things like gas and whatever that we export readily that we could probably use here. And we saw a story today I talked about earlier, Victoria is essentially running out of gas. I mean, how in a country like Australia do you run out of gas? But James Bowen said today, and I played the clip earlier, that he's ready to talk about this every day until the next election. I feel like they're kind of buying into the game that the coalition set up for them here.
Well, as long as it's a mature conversation, you don't mind Bowen opening his mouth and having that discussion about nuclear. Look, at the end of the day, the targets have been set for. Yeah, well, that's true. But the reality is that Australians are looking for a mature conversation. It's proof that we've matured as a country. We can have these debates. But by all means, we should have never, ever, ever blocked the ability for Australia to have nuclear in the first place. And sadly, that was a decision of Howard with the support of the Greens at that time. But look, I've got extended family that live in Biloela, one of the sites where the Callide Power Station is. I spoke to them just a week ago when this announcement was made, and I said, "How do you feel about it?" And they just simply said, "Look, as long as we don't lose jobs in the area, we're very happy to see nuclear." And they're 5 kilometres away from that site. So it's pretty obvious that people are open to the idea of nuclear. It's about time, if we're to keep manufacturing in this country, we've got to have cheap energy. It will not come from solar. It won't come from wind. And hydrogen, if you're worried about volatile fuels out there, hydrogen is one of the most volatile. And yet we're looking to put a massive big plant down there in Gladstone. So, look, I'm glad people are open to this discussion about nuclear.
Stephen, how can we justify this big pay rise that Sam Mostyn, the incoming Governor-General, is going to get? $709,000 a year. It's $214,000 more than David Hurley is getting right now. How is there an excuse for that in a cost of living crisis?
Well, look, I'm not sure when the last substantive increase for the Governor-General went through. I don't know whether they've been getting just the small regular increases. But certainly, I mean, David Hurley proved it. There's an enormous job that is being done. And I think if you were to look at the independent tribunal, they would take into account the added responsibilities that Governor-Generals over the last 10 years have been engaged in. And there's been, their compassionate work when we have national crises and national floods and national bushfires, and they've been there, they've represented us overseas. So all of these are important parts of the role, but I suspect that most of the work that has been done has been adding up, and clearly the independent tribunal decided that it was time to...
Well, it's not the tribunal, this is a decision of the government.
Yeah.
The government
as I said, I'm not sure whether it's a government or
it is,
the
no, set by the government. This is set by the government. I mean, look, James, if they can tell me that the Governor-General's workload has gone up 43% in the last 3 years, or last 5 years, sorry, which is what the pay increase will be, then maybe I could understand the argument. But for heaven's sake, 700 grand, it's more than the Prime Minister's on, James.
Stephen, you've still got it. You should never have left the Senate, mate. Your BS detector's right up there. It's so good, mate. Look, this is looking after mates. This is Labor looking after their mates. This is a woman that doesn't even believe in the monarchy. Look, call me a cynic, but I'd say this. I reckon this is Labor deliberately jacking the wages up. This is likely, in Labor's books, to be the very last Governor-General will have. I think this just feeds into the Republican debate. Why have we got to spend all this money on, a Governor-General? Let's get rid of it and go to a republic. That's what Labor's doing here. And in the meantime, they're throwing everyone on the gravy train.
Well, look, we could get rid of the GG and we could go to a republic, but you know what? It'd cost us a lot more than 700k. So if that's the choice I've got to make, maybe it's enough to convince me to pay the 700k. Stephen Conroy, James Ashby, thank you so much for your time.